So Andrew, what makes you wake up in the morning?
What makes me wake up in the morning? Usually the sun. What gives me life when I wake up in the morning is reveling in the miracle that is life, like the fact that we are here and alive and don't even know why we're here, what we're here to do it's just such a profound mystery. And what gets me up and moving is just to experience the joy of life and to be able to make a impact on making it even more beautiful while I'm here. Feels like a meaningful thing to do and brings me joy.
Great. So welcome to our podcast. I'm so delighted and happy to host you here. And thank you for taking the time. And just for our listeners to know, we're currently recording it. I'm in Israel and you're in India. And you will probably tell us shortly about what you're doing there. But maybe we'll start with kind of an introduction, for listeners who don't know you, who don't know Game Changers 500, what it's all about.
Sure. Well, about 12 years ago, I, like many of the people probably listening to this, started to recognize that we were facing a collision of crises as a human species. And I wanted to participate in some meaningful way in helping humanity navigate towards a more thriving existence for all, and sat in a deep inquiry of like, what's mine to do and what do I feel moved to do? And one of the things that was really apparent for me at the time was I watched a lot of my friends graduate from business school and rise in the ranks of big corporations and be totally miserable. And it was a tragedy for me to think that these student leaders who were called the leaders of tomorrow, we were being shepherded into what we thought were successful careers only to be left dulled and disempowered and disenchanted just with what we were doing with our lives. And so it seemed like a double lose that some of the brightest young people were powering some of the most destructive companies and becoming depressed in the process. And so that was an initial insight of, why do we showcase success through lists like Fortune 500, Rank 500? Where's the companies that are really leading with purpose, that aren't just nonprofits, but are companies that are a meaningful place to work, where there's amazing benefits? And at that time, there wasn't that many that were well known. And I committed to find them. And so that was an early project that led to a lot of research on what differentiates the performers from the pretenders to really actually be purpose-driven. What does that mean? Like, how would you identify companies that are purpose-driven or not purpose-driven? And beyond just having a purpose, how about all these other practices, like creating an amazing work environment or treating the planet well? Like, what was all that about? And how do you codify that and get a sense for like what are the catalog of best practices companies can do? And as I did that more and more, I got better at identifying the performers from the pretenders, and Game Changers 500 became a ranking of the world's top 4 benefit businesses, and then took on many different forms and different rankings, and led me to where I am today.
So you said one thing that kind of caught my ear. You said that we needed to identify the performers from the pretenders. Maybe you can talk about that a bit, because I think that, especially today, probably less 10 years ago, but especially today, many companies are trying to kind of wear this suit of, corporate being purposeful, or being attentive to the environment, but it's in many times it's no more than like for marketing purposes. It's not really something that is profoundly in the in the culture of the company.
Yes, that's right. So when I was getting started, one of my objectives was to make these types of businesses cool, to make it more known and more common that you could actually build a business that's successful financially, but also creating really meaningful, positive impact. And as time went on, that mission was accomplished by me and many others that were at the early kind of stages of this movement. And when anything becomes cool, it attracts those that want to be cool and are more driven from ego rather than just from love.
Right.
And so what we've seen now is large corporations needing to get into the game of purpose because millennials don't want to work for a company that doesn't have a higher mission. And so, but what that means is you have a lot more pretenders. You have a lot of people, a lot of companies that are looking to check the boxes of like, okay, we're doing these 10 practices, therefore we can make this marketing claim, but it's not genuine, and it's missing the whole point. And what people trust is they trust genuine care. They trust when they feel there's a consciousness in the organization that's actually considering how it impacts life. So you can't manipulate your way into it or market your way into it. It needs to be genuine, and it's the invite for every person. It's not a company thing. It's a person thing of what are you doing to express that you care? And it's been quite the ride for me as I've since been invited to consult a lot of Fortune 500 companies and companies that want to get into this game. And it's been fun to be that truth teller of no, purpose isn't just this fancy statement. I've been in boardrooms where there's literally a legal team and a team of consultants all like wordsmithing the new purpose statement, and they have all this hope for the company now being purpose driven, and they're completely missing the point, right? Purpose is something you feel. Right. It's something that gives you meaning. It's not something that is just a bunch of words put together that is more like a marketing slogan. And so I think it's great that companies are failing at this and that it's being exposed, because it's bringing truth to the conversation that what people actually want is they want to feel their heart. They actually want to move from a mechanical way of operating to one where they actually feel like they're meaningfully contributing to life. And that's a personal journey.
Yeah. And so how do they react when you kind of, show them the truth? I'm sure that it's not a pretty sight for everyone, right? Because some I would say probably think they are purposeful, and you kind of show them something else.
Well, the women get it first. So I'd say the women are relieved. They're also usually the ones that bring me in, interestingly enough. It's either a millennial or a woman in leadership. I'd say 9 times out of 10. And people are challenged. And so, I mean, it's the classic story of the head and the heart. And if it could even feel like a threat to that energy that you could say is the energy of the head or the energy of the ego. And, one company I worked with, it was about 6 months in, they spent millions of dollars on this purpose initiative. And we had them tracking like proof of purpose. So it got to the place where they started to really understand the perspective I was sharing, and they're like, okay, we can't promote that we're purpose driven. They're a large manufactured food company that you'd probably consider to be crap food, right? And so, and they were really in it. Like they were, the CEO and the executive team were in it for the right reasons. And so we were tracking all the different ways that we were proving purpose within the company. And about 6 months into the journey, the CEO gets fired. And he was kind of forced to resign, but he was fired. And the chairman of the board comes over, takes over position of CEO, lays off all these people, merges the company with one of their large competitors. And within a few months, he personally makes $19.9 million. Tens of thousands of people get laid off. The company is now taken over by a Brazilian group who is the epitome of profit at all cost. And boom, all the purpose work is gone. And then he resigns as CEO, makes his money, and he's out of it. And so these are the dynamics, right? It wasn't that the company was even doing bad. It was, shifting in a purposeful direction is a long-term initiative. And it's proven that companies that are purpose-driven, their long-term profitability far exceeds their competitors. Some studies, like Firms of Endearment, show that ratio as high as 15 to 1, I believe it is. 15 times. I mean, it's like insanely more profitable. But short-term profit isn't the game of purpose. It's long-term profit. And so the dynamics in large corporations are such that it's a real challenge.
So how did you come with the name of Game Changer, like, for this organization, for this work you're doing? What's the definition of a game changer for you? You heard me?
Oh, the question cut out there. How did I come up with the name Game Changers?
Yeah. So what is a game changer for you? You decided to call this initiative the Game Changers. What's your definition for a game changer? So. So what's your definition of a game changer? How do you describe it?
So I use the term game changer very deliberately, and I see it being very different from a change maker. We can create change in the world, and that's great. And you could say being a change maker is like a first tier level of change, where you're creating change within the existing structures of society. What I mean when I say game changer is it's actually changing the coordination system that drives our economy. And when you look through things through the lens of games, game theory is a pretty well studied area of what drives human behavior. And what became clear to me is that if we wanted to create long-term significant change, that we needed to change the game, not just change some of the rules. It was a bigger level of change. So if we wanted different outcomes, we needed different behaviors, and to get those different behaviors and changing actually the game itself.
Okay. And earlier in our conversation, you said something about this global crisis that we face. And can you talk more about what this global crisis that you saw, and how do you see this whole movement changing it or fixing it?
Yeah, so the movement has evolved a lot over the years. There has been some really meaningful initiatives to create law. So there's a more clear definition around what it means to be in this movement and not. So there's B Corp certification that is a pathway to a legal format, which is available in the USA and several other countries now. In the USA, they're called benefit corporations. And that's a legal structure that sits along with the traditional kind of three-sector model of like for-profit, non-profit government. So the idea is there a space in between the for-profit and the non-profit? And if so, what is it? And what is it called? And how do you know if you're a part of that group? And so it's been great to see some really meaningful work happen in that space. And there's a long way to go. I mean, to have governments adopt new policy it's a slower path, and I ultimately think it's one of the more meaningful ways to move this from just a fringe movement to something that's like actually a new sector of the economy. And so that's one way of looking at what's changing in the space. Through the lens I look through the lens of game dynamics, what I see happening is that there's a shift from this level one I call win-lose, a profit at all cost model, to a level of win-win, which is a more ethical version of capitalism. It's focused on accomplishing a noble mission. It's about more empowered forms of leadership. It's about distributing the reward around value creators and having commitments to ethical minimums like fair trade and wage, measuring a triple bottom line. So all the things we see among these, what you could say is conscious businesses or for-benefit businesses. And that's great. And it's like cleaning up the shadow of profit-driven capitalism. But we're also seeing that a lot of those companies have a hard time sustaining those practices as they scale and they raise more capital. And so that's a whole nother question we can get into. And I see the necessity for this next level, this next kind of shift from win-lose to win for all, and where we're actually changing the game completely, and we're actually getting out of the limitations of you could say the limitations of capitalism as a core game design, to something that's fundamentally new. But to actually play that new game is actually requiring a developmental upgrade at the human level, to recognize that we actually are really interconnected, that we have the capacity to work with a far more vast intelligence when we become a collective of sovereign individuals who can sense what's meaningful and act towards it, and kind of leverage the collective field, kind of like a collective intelligence or a group genius where it's more wise than the sum of its parts. And when we can start working in those models, we transcend the limits of traditional leadership, of command and control hierarchy, but even more empowered forms of leadership where there's still a few really guiding the many. How do you actually unlock the full capacity of the many to be a more emergent field of creativity and potential? And so that's what I see happening as a new frontier. And to where a lot of my work is focused these days. And technologies like blockchain are really built to enable that level of self-organizing, decentralized coordination, which is essentially what games do, is their coordination systems.
Yeah. So where do you envision this going? Like, it's like I'm asking you to be a bit like a futurist, looking forward, with all of this, I call it that we are like in this consciousness resolution. I think this decade, like probably the 10 years and more, the human consciousness is changing as I feel it. And I think it's also what you said here. And so how do you see this impacting going forward on business?
Well, I just saw the front cover of a Fast Company magazine this month by Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia saying, capitalism is dead. Yeah. And this is the story that's now coming out. We've seen a lot of our favorite conscious companies, Whole Foods, Tom's, Burt's Bees. There's so many examples of these companies that were, Ben & Jerry's probably the first example, that were like the praised heroes of like doing business in a good way. Those are the companies I was ranking as best in the world. And as time went on, we saw a lot of them slip back to what I would say is level one, back from a win-win to a win-lose design, as while they did a lot of meaningful practices, they didn't necessarily change the game. They were unable to actually sustain some of the practices that were really coming from a genuine care. And that's the slippery slope. And that's why people like Vaughn are saying capitalism is dead, is that it's not going to get us to where we need to go. And so when you look at the collision of crises we're facing, the timelines we're facing to actually solve them, and you look at our main way of coordinating human activity being either capitalism or nonprofit work or governments, you start losing hope that we actually have a chance of meeting the demands within either of those three organizational models. And so then you say, okay, well, what would actually be a necessary and sufficient system that would actually allow us to leap into a completely new way of coordinating human intelligence and human behavior? And that's what essentially what I've been working on, is defining that game design. And it's an invite for everybody who feels called to participate on an evolutionary journey of moving from somebody who's grown up in a system that trained them to win, that trained them to be independent, that trained them to beat the competition, to the humility to feel yourself as a cell in a broader organism, and that your job is actually to remain a healthy cell, which means to be able to actually work in symbiosis with the other cells, where your existence is actually bettering the existence of the other cells, or your capacity to just be available for spontaneous action allows the capacity for emergence to create surprising beauty and harmony with the other cells. So it's a completely different way of operating as human beings that we're being invited into. And yes, there's some, wisdom from the past that can help guide people down this in this direction. And it's still relatively new. You're certainly not going to get this in any form of traditional school system. So I feel like what's happening is the imaginal cells are finding themselves. These are the cells that are waking up in the dream and coming together to form a whole new potential. And I think that is actually one of the most meaningful things happening right now on the planet, is people are waking up, finding the other people who have woken up, and starting to participate in experiments that transcend the limitations of our current system design or designs of systems like capitalism.
So maybe you can share some of this cutting-edge experiments that are happening right now around, how economics is evolving.
Sure. So one of the areas that you could say is a necessary shift is to go from a finite game of winners and losers to an infinite game that you play for the sake of enjoyment. You don't play to end the infinite game. That's why it's called infinite, right? It's this is the big game change, is how do we actually go from a finite game that we play to win, we play to sell the company, we play to exit. The whole game is actually designed to end, to exit.
On exit, yeah.
And so to honor the capital that comes in, if you set yourself up in that game, then to be fair, like that's the game you're playing. So don't be disappointed when your company gets taken over by, name the big corporation. Like that's the game you signed up for. And so, Whole Foods being taken over by Amazon recently, or Ben & Jerry's being taken over by Unilever back in the day. This is the pattern. But if you want to play the infinite game, if you want to exist to bring joy to the world, to bring love to the world, not ever have to end that game, and actually create a work environment where everybody's actually doing the same. Everybody's coming to participate in contributing their greatest gifts to the world from their own sense of joy. Maybe that sounds a little utopian, but these are the fundamentals of an infinite game: is you play for the sake of enjoyment, and contributing to others and to society is obviously one of the things that brings us profound joy. So how do you sustain that? So it's transitioning from a game that has an objective of accomplishing a mission or maximizing profit to a game that prioritizes the common good. And so when you don't have a mission you're looking to accomplish other than to actually just keep serving the commons, it starts to look a little bit differently. So there's an experiment that's been going on since the 1950s. It exists in the Basque region of Spain. It's called Mondragon, and it's an interesting hybrid as they do billions of dollars in revenue. They are a leader in many different industries and in the types of organizations they run. But it's structured completely differently, where there isn't just the founder that has the idea, that gets the VC funding, that goes and builds a company and then exits and makes his investors happy. It's designed where the community, the society of Mondragon actually comes up. They have an innovation council where they come up with ideas that they feel would best serve society. Then they find somebody in their community who would be the right fit to run that organization, and they find a bunch of other people that would help build it, based on their strengths and skills. And then that organization that they lift up is 80% owned by all the workers and 20% owned by the parent commons. It's more of a commons type structure, which is Mondragon. So as each new entity succeeds, resources are flowing back to the commons to then create more entities. And then because the workers own the organization and they cap salaries at, I believe, 5 or 6x living wage, it means that a lot of resources flow back. And so it's the indication of a different type of model that we're going to see a lot more experiments in this direction, where we're getting out of the idea of centralization and private control and a few profiting greatly while many don't. I think it was last stat I saw on large corporations, their executives are typically making 200 times more than the lowest paid worker. It's like, that's the game that's ending. That's when people are saying capitalism are dead, that I believe is what they're referring to. The gap between the rich and the poor is continuing to widen. When 24 people have as much wealth as 50% of the human population, it's a sign that we're moving towards a collapse scenario. Past civilizations typically start to fail when we reach this level of inequity.
Yeah, about half a year ago, we've been in Vegas, and we visited. We did a tour in Zappos, and I know Zappos is one of the company in that also, I think, marked pretty high in Game Changers 500. And what was interesting to see there, that the whole management system is different. It's not the typical hierarchy that we're used to seeing in big corporations. They have this holacracy system that they work by teams that manage themselves. It's something that is very, very, it was very inspiring to see how that works.
Yeah, Zappos is an experiment in itself, right? And Tony Hsieh, when he created it, was very much seeing it as an experiment to see how do we actually build a company that spreads happiness to all the employees, to all the customers, and it studied happiness and recognized that an organization design that would actually incubate happiness would be one that looks more like an infinite game, right? Where people are playing, they're joining, participating in the company because it's actually enjoyable, because it brings them happiness, brings other people happiness. And therefore, moving from hierarchies to more holacracies is part of that system as well. And so we see a shift from leadership models to what I say from leadership to sovereignty is, I think, the right way to speak to the transition. Is we're moving from a few guiding the many to actually supporting people being in their own sovereignty to sense what is meaningful and act towards it in connection with the whole. Mm-hmm. And so that's definitely another part of the game change. One of the core aspects of the game that is shifting, which you could frame as choice making, how choices get made in the game.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about change. So from your experience, what is like the most overlooked aspect of change?
The most overlooked aspect of change, I'd say, is the change that's closest to each of us, which is the change in self. And you could even say the journey from the head to the heart, you know, it's maybe the hardest journey of change. And given the collision of crises that we face, I mean, you see so many responses to do something. What do we do? Do we do this? Do we do that? And there's all these initiatives, and the UN is doing this, and it's a political thing. And no, we got to change politics and get a better leader in so they can do something differently. And it's like, for me, it feels like a frenetic race that is like shuffling around deck chairs in the Titanic. And that the actual change that's needed and necessary is the change in self, the change in consciousness. And that until that changes, nothing really much is changing. The raw material is still the same. And so when we talk about the system, well, the system actually is just an external reflection of our own internal reality. And so we're the raw material that's actually building everything. So if our raw material doesn't change, whatever we do isn't going to be anything transformationally new. It'll just be more of the same. And given what we're up against as a society, nothing short of a transformational change is going to get us to where we need to go to continue our time here on planet Earth into the future. And so I think what's most overlooked, especially in the political arenas and the UNs and these types of groups, is that it's not about figuring out what we need to do. It's about first sincerely asking, who do we need to be?
So it kind of struck me that maybe that's what differentiates the performers from the pretenders. So the pretenders are not actually doing the real, internal change that you just mentioned, opposed to the performers who are, as you said, are being it.
That's completely it. That's really astute. And it's actually really simple. People ask me, it's like, all right, I want to build a social enterprise, or I want to be part of this movement, and what do I need to do? And how do I, typically, especially a startup, it's like, how do I structure it? Like, what type of legal structure should I be in? It's which is, these are important considerations, but nonetheless, it's like, no, it's like, just care. Just everything that you do, just care as much as you can. Like, care about your employees, care about what materials you're buying, care about any waste you produce and how to minimize it. Like, care that you deliver something to the world that actually creates really meaningful impact and transforms people's lives. Like, that's actually it. It's so simple. And that's what the performers are doing, is they care. And because they care, people trust them. People want to work there because they want to be cared for. And people buy their product because they feel the love and the attention to detail. It's just so obvious, when you really go deeper into the inquiry. But fascinating that we get lost in the model and the concept of it rather than just getting to the heart of the matter.
Okay. You also talked about earlier, you mentioned this phrase of the triple bottom line. Maybe you can elaborate a bit about it, because we are used it, capitalism is it to one bottom line, which is profit. What is the triple bottom line?
So the triple bottom line is often referred to as people, planet, and then profit. Some people will say, well, it's a quadruple bottom line. It's purpose, people, planet, profit. And and again, it's just going back to the simplicity. It's a helpful frame to say companies that are part of this shift are not just measuring profitability. They're actually prioritizing other things. And I think the word priority is the right one. It's what do you give priority to? So you can give priority to profit, which I'd say is level 1. You can give priority to a purpose or a mission, which is level 2. And then you can give priority to the common good, to the commons, which is, I'd say, level 3. And most of the companies are existing in level 2 that are part of this kind of conscious business space. That's the evolution. But I think the next chapter is actually learning how to give priority to the common good. And that, I think, will take us beyond the organizational structures of corporations.
Okay. I'm interested to hear about, the whole process of, if you look at the Game Changers website, you can see all these companies that are kind of like certified or got your badges. Can you talk about this system, the badges system? What do you actually measure? How do you define which company is a game changer, which is not?
Yeah, it's been an evolving framework. I'm about to release a new one, so I won't go too deep into the old one, as I'm really excited about the new one I've been developing, and it brings in this third level I'm speaking to, as I feel like the world's really, really ready for actually like something fresh, and that the people, a lot of the founders of these companies, of these famous purpose-driven companies, are feeling quite jaded as they lost their business, they got kicked out of their company, or and they just realized that like this wasn't the hope that they thought it would actually like make it really meaningful. And so I'm excited to roll that out, and that's well in the works. So yeah, but over time I've gone through many iterations on how do you simplify understanding what it means to maximize your care through your company. Mm-hmm. And there's a few different lenses for that. The game lens is my favorite, and games have certain aspects. Games have objectives, games have how you make choices, how you develop people, how you measure performance. They have incentives, and they have ways of distributing reward. And so, you can look through those different lenses to see like how the company's performing. You can also look through I created these different badges that were kind of symbols of categories of best practices. So rather than having like a checklist, you could more clearly see like, does your company deserve that badge? Is that an area of practice that you're really excelling in? So something like have remarkable customer care, or minimizing waste and water, or having a tribe-like culture, or so these, there's a whole assortment of them that I created to help kind of codify and simplify what it really means to be a business that cares.
Okay. So if a company wants to be like certified, so she's applying, and then you have this processes to check which processes are in place, which are not. How do you measure that they are actually performers and not pretenders?
So while this is changing with this new framework I'm rolling out, aspects of it are the same. As there's an assessment. So there's an assessment a company can take that isn't a certification, but it's an assessment to allow really anybody in the company to learn about the model and be able to assess the company of like, are we doing that? Are we not doing that? And my process with this is to keep it educational and simple. I think certifications really have a place, but I think it's actually where a lot of this work kind of slides off the rails as we get so into the nuance of it. And we try to create this perfect metric system and have all companies be measurable against a certain number. And it's just like, that's actually really hard to do. And we're kind of missing the point. There's so many different ways you can express care through your company. There's an endless list of practices, and depending on your industry, it's going to change. And so what I like to do is to create basically learning tools that are also assessments that any employee can take, because the more alignment you have on your team in terms of like what the goal is, where you're trying to move to as a company, the more likely you're going to get there. The more people that can see the target, the more likely you're going to hit it. So rather than just have a few companies fill out a detailed certification and collect a bunch of data, my approach is a little bit different. And with this new framework that I'm releasing, there will be a new assessment tool that comes with that as well.
Cool. So we've talked a lot about the big corporations and all that, and many of the listeners who are listening to this are small business owners who really care, and they wake up in the morning caring about their business, caring about their customer, and so on. And how can they apply all of these principles into their business? Do you have like a kind of what would be your direction to them?
So when you're a small business or you're just starting, there's a few practices that I find are most meaningful. One is called a theory of change. This is a practice that any significant nonprofit does. It's basically what's your purpose, what's your mission, what's your strategy for accomplishing that mission, and how are you measuring if you're on track? That's essentially what a theory of change is. And so you can imagine a nonprofit that needs to raise like donations to achieve its mission. They need to really show they've got a good theory of change. They've got a clear purpose, a clear mission, their strategy is solid, and they know how they're measuring if they're on track. And the better they do that, the more likely they're going to be the nonprofit that raises the money that solves that issue in society. And so this is now what companies are recognizing. If you're truly mission driven, then like be able to show the strategy to accomplish that mission. Be a purpose washing statement on your website. It's like, no, if you're really in it to like contribute that value to society, it's like, all right, what's your ways of doing it? Some of those ways might be nonprofit in nature. Guayaquil, the yerba mate tea company, their mission is to steward over 200,000 acres of forest in South America. And so they sell yerba mate tea, not because they're fascinated with tea, it's because their realization was that in order to actually meet that mission, that they needed to find a way to make those forests more valuable to keep than to cut down, and that yerba mate grows in the shade of these trees. And so that they're like, okay, well, if we can, part of our strategy to meet our mission is going to sell tea to the college students who need to stay wired to write exams. So they, and sure enough, they're a super successful company. They're not a nonprofit. They have a nonprofit arm that teaches rural farmers in South America practices to not cut down the trees and to cultivate yerba mate, but they're sustainable and scalable because they found a way of generating revenue that sustains the mission. And so theory of change is a really meaningful thing to do. It's a really great way to show that you're in business for more than just profit, and you're not trying to hide behind that. You have a very clear strategy and clear ways to measure your traction.
Okay. I saw something interesting in your personal website, which is called it's a program called version 2 for personal success. So what is version 1 and what is version 2? Yeah.
I've been in the personal transformation world since I was a kid, growing up in a family that is in that space as well. And so I think my parents actually played motivational tapes while I was sleeping as a child and kind of messed me up in other ways. But
who did they play for you?
I don't know, but I remember there was a big blue sticker on the bottom of my bed, and it said "Life is terrific," and it was one of these like motivational speakers. And so I've since learned the shadow of that, and the healing you need to do when you grow up in a family like that. Yeah. But I'm super grateful, super blessed, and I've got to play in the space and create different programs over the years, and that was one of them. So the difference between version 1 is the idea is the version 1 part of your life is being empowered by circumstance. So you're looking for things outside of you to feel your sense of success and empowerment. And then version 2 is it being empowered despite your circumstances. So being able to kind of sustain a level of joy and fulfillment regardless of what you have externally. And I think that's true self-mastery.
Yeah, that's cool. So you started to mention your parents, and it kind of struck me like, who's I'm not sure if to them, but who's the person which most impacted your life? What did you learn from him?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think obviously it would be my parents in providing me an environment to be entrepreneurial, to celebrate failure, to pull me out of school into seminars when I was a kid and get exposed to different life skills, and definitely have had a really profound impact. And outside of my parents, I would say I've had a few really powerful teachers, and particularly ones who have supported me with like healing my past. And despite having what you could say is a great childhood, I've learned how to really to be empowered despite circumstances. There's a lot to clean up that's in our limbic system that was stored energy before we were 7 years old, that you feel like you'll be in a life situation. You might feel like a contraction, like it's like somebody's pressing a bruise, and it's like a sign that there's something you learned, some experience you had when you were young, like trap that energy in, and it's hijacking your well-being. And until you release that energy, you're not fully free. And some of this stuff is pre-verbal, so you don't even really know why it's there. It's just there. You might get terrified of a snake, or you might get terrified of a certain situation, or feel sometimes you need to run or scream. And so getting the support to heal those aspects of yourself, I think, is so key. And that's been a really massive part of my journey. And the teachers that were wise enough to see that I needed that work and were patient enough to call me in and guide me through it. I mean, forever grateful.
This kind of relates to what you talked about earlier about, making, the personal change, and then, inside of you, and then it changes the things outside. So it's kind of connected together.
Yeah.
So what are your inspiration sources today? Who do you look for inspiration today when you need it?
Well, I'm in India right now, and gosh, just being blown away by the depth of wisdom in this culture. And yeah, I've been drawn to different paths of yoga, and I'm continually moved by going into these different lineages that are ancient. And I mean, it takes a level of humility to just, be persistent, and to just allow yourself to get inspired, to go deep enough to actually not have inspiration be a concept, but be something that moves through you, because you're tasting something that these teachings were designed to bring you to, not to give your mind more food, but to bring your soul on a journey of liberation.
Right. And if you could today, looking back, give Andrew, like many years, just starting his way, like the one best advice that you can give yourself, but back then, what would it be?
Oh my, what would it be? Stay curious rather than certain.
Well, that's a great advice. That's perfect advice. Okay. So you're in India right now, and you talked about, some changes you're going to do in the model, but, beyond that, what would be your next big thing? Do you know? Do you see it right now?
Yeah, it's all rolling out. And I'm learning to have it just move through me rather than be done by me. and to be a witness to it being created as much as I'm creating it. And it is clear. I feel a deep dharma to support the evolution of economics and how we coordinate action in society, and to do that in a way that aligns with a deeper truth of our interconnected nature and our true place of rest, which is a place of love and care for others. And how when we are supported in a coordination system that is moving that through us and having that be supported and nurtured, what I think we're capable of as a human family is just so beautiful and vastly more wise and creative and capable than the coordination system that has supported the ego and has arguably built the infrastructure that we've needed to now evolve into this next tier. So I'm not bashing the way the world's got to its place. I think it's all part of a beautiful journey. And there's many souls ready for a new game. And that game isn't going to get created by one person. It's actually going to emerge through a field willing and courageous enough to be the experiment. And so the deepest call in my heart is to find those game changers and unite them in service to this next great experiment of building a new game.
Wow, amazing. So I wish you all the success in doing that. It sounds like you're, right on the path to make it happen. Is there anything else important that I didn't ask you that you would like to share or to state?
I think you covered a lot in your questions, great questions. And yeah, my invite for everybody listening is, in these times ahead, I think they're going to become more and more interesting, challenging, dynamic, and to really be tuned in to our actions and whether we're contributing to the same frequencies that is the system that is, if we're being the same raw materials, or we can move into a direction that's maybe more risky for our sense of certainty or knowing, but ultimately there's something in us that calls us in that direction to do something more transformational, and to recognize that that's a shift in how we be together, and that anybody that's feeling that to not feel alone in it. And I would just encourage just basking in the incredible moment that we're in, and to it's like Gandhi said it so simply, it's just be the change. And I think there's a lot of just people that want to do something. They're just like, what do we do? We should do something. And I think the thing to do is to stop, pause before you do anything. Before you're doing is contributing more to the same energetics, the same, to take that moment to pause. So how do you actually deepen who you're being? And being a different person is, I think, the thing for us all to be doing.
Cool. Andrew, I want to thank you so much for your time and for this. It has been wonderful, and I personally learned a lot from that, and I'm sure our listeners will also learn. I will put on the website for this episode links to Game Changers, to your personal website, any other resources people can look for if they want to go in more in depth.
Those will be good, and just to stay posted is the gamechangers.co site will forward to the new one once it's ready, and so more to come.
Good, great. So thank you so much, and continue enjoying India.
Will do. Namaste.
Namaste.